Americans have no problem singing their own praises, calling out, this is what I did, these are my accomplishments. Whereas I find in Ireland, students are much more self-deprecating, oftentimes feel very uncomfortable really showcasing those accomplishments. They don't really sell it, if you will.
That was Jennifer Petoff, Google Techie and travel blogger extraordinaire. And I'm Martin Nutty.
I'm John Lee. Welcome to our latest Global Irish Nation conversation here on Irish Stew.
This episode of Irish Stew is brought to you by Murph Guide, the New York City nightlife website, connecting the fun to the fun people. Visit murphguide.com.
Hey, welcome back to Irish Stew, and today's Global Irish Conversation will take us, it starts off really in Buffalo. It comes to us from Dublin, and in a way, it's going to take us all around the world. Martin?
Yeah, I think we're doing an American in Dublin as opposed to an American in Paris. I'm delighted to have Jennifer Petoff on. She is, as John mentioned, a native of Buffalo, but lives in Dublin. She is a doctor. Got a PhD in chemistry, but she doesn't actually work in chemistry. She works in technology. She's a published author with a best-selling book in the tech space. She's director at Google and a devotee of travel. And with that, I'd like to welcome you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, John. It's definitely a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So I just want to roll it back a little bit. You work on Silicon Dock in the heart of Dublin. And that's kind of, these days, is an ultra-modern hub, very different from what I remember from the 1980s, where the place was pretty much ruined. But one of the things I've noticed reading your excellent travel blog, Sidewalk Safari, is your absolute fascination with things maybe a little bit older, specifically the doors of Dublin. So what's going on there with that Doors of Dublin thing? And I have a particular take on it, but I'm interested to hear yours.
No, I would actually say this is somewhat of a pandemic phenomenon. I've always liked the Doors of Dublin, the beautiful, colorful Georgian Doors on Marion Square or St. Stephen's Green or further afield. And but during the pandemic, when we were in lockdown here in Dublin, we could basically go up to 5 kilometers from home. And fortunately for me, that's within my sort of pandemic commuting distance, so to speak. And so just really took it up over the past couple of years, photographing all those beautiful doors and just really noticing those more local surroundings. I love it. And especially this time of year, oh my goodness, the Christmas doors and you get Halloween doors. I'm obsessed with Dublin doors.
One of the kind of hidden benefits of the pandemic, we got to kind of look around the neighborhood more.
True. That's very true. And I think, you don't have to travel far away to really appreciate the world, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I don't know how much you know about the back history. Obviously, there's a famous poster from the 1970s done on the doors of Dublin. Apparently that went on display or rose to fame, believe it or not, in New York City. People saw it and they wanted a copy of it. And it kind of went on fire. Now, as a child in the 1970s Dublin, looking at these Georgian doors, I associated, interestingly, Dublin's Georgian architecture with actual poverty, because many of the houses, especially on the north side of the River Liffey, were tenements. So you'd have a house originally designed for one family with 100 people living in it. So I kind of scratched my head at it. Now, some 40 years later, I look at it very differently. And the original poster, I believe, actually featured a square on the south side of Dublin, Fitzwilliam Square, which is really one of the most incredibly beautiful Georgian streetscapes that you can actually find in the world. And Dublin's amazing because of that kind of Georgian architecture. But it's also a place, it also in my childhood was something that people struggled with because it represented a legacy from Britain. But I think that's changed now. I think people see it in a different way. I'm not sure what your take is on that whole Georgian thing.
That's a good question. There's a lot to unpack there, I would say. First of all, Fitzwilliam Square is absolutely one of my favorite places to go door hunting in Dublin, so to speak. In fact, we were down that way, my husband and I, yesterday for a coffee and a photo walk. And I hear you about the sort of Georgian architecture being associated with both with gentry and then over time these grand homes evolved into multi-tenant dwellings and even into tenements, as you're saying. And I know there's actually a tenement museum on the north side. We did a little day out in Dublin, staycation a couple of years ago before the pandemic, actually, and took a day trip and sort of toured the tenement museum. And it's fascinating history. And even up until the 1960s, like that particular building didn't even have running water. So I think it's important to reflect on that and to think about how far Dublin and Ireland has come in the intervening 50 years or so. Today, I would just add, like a lot of the Georgian squares, have undergone a facelift. They've been renovated, oftentimes into office space. Like there's a lot of the buildings along Marion Square, for example, are now offices instead of just homes. But yeah, I think Dublin is continuously evolving. Is how I look at it.
We could kind of like really probe the murky origins of Dublin and probably spend this whole podcast just talking about some of the features of life in that city. But I kind of want to roll back to your origin story. You grew up in Buffalo, which is, for our listeners that are not that familiar with American geography, specifically New York State, Buffalo is right up on the border of Canada. And it is actually fairly close to Niagara Falls and quite a distance actually from New York City, where John and I am sitting right here. But was the plan always to move from Buffalo to Ireland? How does that all fit together? Was it your professional career that drove that? What's your connection to Ireland, I guess?
Okay, no, happy to chat about that a little bit. So yes, Buffalo is a cold and snowy place in Western New York, like you say, not far from the Canadian border. One thing I will say about Buffalo, you won't find more avid sports fans anywhere in the U.S. or Ireland, for that matter. And I am a Buffalo Bills American football fan and a Buffalo Sabres hockey fan to this day. I used to go to Sabres games growing up with my dad. And in fact, they would always play both the American and the Canadian national anthems at the arena. And so fun fact, I won't sing it for you today because I have a terrible singing voice, but I do know all the words to the Canadian national anthem. In terms of, how I got from Buffalo to Ireland, that was never really the aspiration. So I tend to take things as they come. For myself in life, over time, my guiding star in life is basically like, I want to travel more and I want to live in different cool places. And I would tend to make decisions based on how that would bring me closer or further away from that particular guiding star. One thing to point out, the travel bug bit me, I would say, a little bit later in life than many people. I didn't even have a passport till I was 25. So really, it was when I was back in the day going to school in Buffalo, didn't really even think it would be a possibility to live in Ireland someday.
Jennifer, let's look at, kind of glance at the career through a lens of something I saw in an interview you did about never waste an opportunity or no opportunity goes unwasted, whichever is the right way to say it.
No opportunity wasted. No opportunity
There you go.
wasted.
I had it in my notes, but I couldn't find it when I needed it. So, it sure looks that way when I look at your LinkedIn profile. Not a lot of downtime. How did that sort of spirit guide you through your career to where you are today?
Yeah, so I like Martin said in the introduction, I started my career as a chemist. So I have a PhD in chemistry, and so my career has essentially been this interesting evolution. If you look at my LinkedIn profile, you might think, wow, this is weird. Like, how does A connect to B, connect to C? But it really does all fit together. And I think with the chemistry in particular, getting a PhD and going to graduate school teaches you a lot of skills that turn out to be super transferable. Communicating. I'm just trying to think of some of those. Yeah. So it's making data-driven decisions. It's perseverance. Like how do you basically, 95%+ of what you try in research doesn't work. So it teaches you how to persevere, also teaches you how to ramp up from knowing basically zero about a topic to being an expert, often a world's expert in some teeny tiny area, oftentimes in a short period of time. So I've been able to use that to reinvent myself over the years. And again, started my career very traditionally, working in the lab in a chemical company. But I found I enjoyed working with people more than doing experiments in the lab. And I also found, hey, I've got this guiding star. I would really like to travel more. I would like to live in different cool places. Unfortunately, chemical companies don't typically have their offices or labs or manufacturing facilities in really nice places. So the industry that I was in was rather limiting. I was fortunate, though, to have some volunteer opportunities while I was still in research. So I got involved with campus recruiting on a volunteer basis. So, ooh, this sounds cool. I can go back to Stanford. I can go back to University of Rochester or other institutions that I was associated with, and talk to students and try and convince them to come work with us. And hey, get to travel cool places.
I do public relations. And also it was kind of like, if you look at my resume, like, what is this guy doing? But I kind of looking backwards, I can make the case for, it somehow makes sense. But, I do public relations, and I work with a lot of, very, high-end executives in various businesses. And I so often find they have an engineering background. They might be in some completely business function, but they have their degree in engineering. And I think it's that they know how to break down a problem. They know how to assemble a team. They know how to meet the deadlines. And that's a very, very transferable skill.
I agree. I always say, I think a background in STEM, so science, technology, engineering, or medicine, et cetera, it's a fantastic foundation for basically anything that you want to do. So it's, as people are looking at, so if you've got kids or students who are thinking about what they want to do with their lives, just because you pursue a degree in science doesn't mean you're going to be sitting in a lab somewhere. Like, there are so many interesting career options that you like more than you can even imagine. So yeah, I really appreciate that foundation.
You bring up the STEM conversation, and there's always a conversation here, at least, about women in STEM. And you found yourself probably early in your career a little bit alone in the room. What has that been like? What does that pathway offer to women? Has it changed?
What's interesting, because I liked chemistry because it was something that not everyone is good at. So like the fact that you talk to people and it's like, oh, I'm studying chemistry, I'm thinking of getting a major in chemistry in college, and people would wrinkle their nose or roll, kind of turn up their nose at it and say like, I hated chemistry, but that basically made me love it more just because it's something that it's unique. It's not everyone is good at. And in terms of being the only one in the room, I actually went to an all girls high school. So I didn't run into some of those same stereotypes or patterns that often discourage girls from pursuing a scientific discipline, like, oh, I don't want to appear extra smart in front of the boys, or teachers preferring and calling on boys rather than the girls. So I think I didn't necessarily appreciate that at the time, but looking back, I think that served me well and gave me the confidence to pursue that chemistry degree.
You mentioned you got your PhD in Stanford. You go work for a number of different companies in the chemical field. And then you all of a sudden transition, well, maybe not all of a sudden, transition to Google, which is totally different industry, obviously. Can you talk a little bit about that move?
I sure can. So we can pick up where we left off. I was mentioning, I was working in the chemical industry in research. I was volunteering for campus recruiting. At one point, I had the opportunity to take that volunteer experience and then parlay it into a full-time job in university relations within the chemical industry. So I thought, oh, this is a fun jaunt for a couple of years, and I'll eventually get back into research or whatnot. But in the meantime, LinkedIn was becoming a thing, and I was actually a pretty early adopter of LinkedIn back in 2006, I thought to myself, there was just something so appealing to me about being able to map and catalog these connections and make new connections. And turns out, that wasn't just for fun. Like Google ended up finding me on LinkedIn and reached out. Apparently, what caught their eye was that mix of that hard science background and the university outreach experience. Because I know my first reaction when I got the email from the recruiter was, what does Google want with a chemist? But like I said, I think they had an appreciation for these transferable skills that I could bring based on my chemistry degree. And then they were interested in me for a position on their university programs team. So that's how that came to be. So kind of a fun little diversion within the chemical industry into recruiting led to a completely different career path. And once again, no opportunity wasted.
Right. Yeah. So now you're, to some degree, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're kind of operating in the talent acquisition space, would be a way I would look at it. But I think your first interaction with Google was on the American side, right? So how do you go from America to Ireland? What sets that up?
Yeah, so I joined the university programs team at Google back in 2007 at our headquarters, or what I affectionately call the mothership in Mountain View, California. And so moved to California from Philadelphia, actually, where I was living at the time, working in the chemical industry. And I still had this guiding star, right? Like this, like one of the reasons I joined Google actually was I thought there would be better odds of me getting an international assignment in the tech industry rather than in the chemical industry. And sure enough, 3 years after joining Google, the opportunity presented itself. I was working in our global business organization at the time, and one of the leaders in that organization had launched a rotation program where they were basically going to send 20 people abroad, high potential people abroad for a year. So I thought to myself, now is my chance. And I applied for a role in London and a role in Dublin, and got the job in Dublin. Never set foot in Ireland before taking that opportunity, but kind of joking to myself, for a year, how bad can it be? It's just weighing up that risk. And turned out it was the best opportunity, the best thing that could have happened to me, because here I am 10 years later, like still in Dublin, still loving it here, and we've made it home.
Jennifer, you're working there at Google in something called site reliable engineering. And I'd like you to explain what that means if you were talking to another tech person, what that means. And then if you were talking to me.
Okay. And actually, that's a good one. So yes, I am a director of site reliability engineering education currently. And again, that is a far departure from what I was doing when I originally joined Google. But let's see, what is SRE, as we call it? And it is a surprisingly tough question to answer succinctly. We've written multiple books on the subject. It's a discipline that was actually invented at Google. And the way I would describe it to, I guess, another techie, it's SRE is the discipline of applying software engineering practices to the management of large scale systems. And then said another way, like if you think about maybe how I would talk to my family about it or whatnot. So it's the SRE teams at Google are the folks responsible for keeping Google up and running 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. So that's the simple answer.
I have to say, I did a little bit of research and I looked it up and I was like, what is this? It has something to do about scalability and this and that. And then Martin said, no, it's about keeping the lights on. Oh, okay, I got it.
At least that's my particular take. And of course, there's been a couple of pretty major outages on some tech behemoths in the past few months. A few months ago, obviously, we had Facebook down for quite an extended period, and they really kind of struggled to get the lights switched back on. And also, actually, as of this date of recording, we're on December 10th, Amazon Web Services had a pretty significant outage a day or two ago. So Have they not read your book on site reliability engineering, or what's going on there?
Well, I would say, like all so SRE and DevOps is another related field, again, that's focused on reliability and focused on running reliable services. I think a key thing to point out is 100% reliability is never the right target for anything. It's basically impossible to achieve. Like so the fact that Facebook is down or Amazon is down, like it's impossible to keep a service up and running, again, 100%, because basically then you could never make any changes to it. Nothing could ever change around it. Like, it would basically have to exist hermetically sealed in a vacuum, and you would kill innovation, basically. So I think the goal of SRE is to, minimize the impacts. Prevent as much as possible, minimize the impact when things go wrong, and then reflect. And a key principle of SRE is blamelessness and a blameless culture. We always look at failure as an opportunity to improve, not to brandish pitchforks, as the case may be. Because the reality is, if you point the finger in an outage, that incentivizes people to cover things up when things go wrong. If you surfaced the issue, you can potentially you'll make your systems more robust and minimize the chance of bad things happening in the future.
So, Jennifer, you mentioned earlier, so you're in site reliability in charge of education. Mm-hmm. And I think that must give you an interesting perspective now, because you started off in that field in America, and now essentially you're also operating in Ireland. Is there any general conclusions, from you're getting new recruits coming in straight out of college or whatever? What's the difference between the Irish and Americans? Or can you even talk about that in generalities? It's kind of like a dangerous space to tiptoe around it.
Oh, well, let's see what we can dig into. So first of all, I wanted to be clear. So my job today is more focused on learning and development. So like my original job at Google was more focused on recruiting and, again, university outreach. I still do a bit of university outreach today. In fact, we've developed a program in working with schools here in Ireland to try and raise the profile of opportunities, internship opportunities, placement opportunities that we have at Google for the folks that are studying computer science and related disciplines here. So that's been a lot of fun to get to know the students, the faculty, the career services folks here. And so I have spent a lot of time working with university students, or third level as they call them here in Ireland. So I can focus there on sort of the talent cultivation aspect. The major differences that I see between, say, U.S. students and students in Ireland is, willingness to toot their own horn. Like, Americans have no problem just, singing their own praises and, calling out, like, this is what I did. These are my accomplishments. I'm proud of my accomplishments. Whereas I find in Ireland, students are much more self-deprecating. They oftentimes feel very uncomfortable, really showcasing those accomplishments. They don't really sell it, if you will. And, we found that there's some really awesome candidates, but, sometimes that doesn't come across that way on paper like it would. So and it may not just be Ireland. Like, I've heard this, it's an issue, like America versus Europe more broadly, but it is something that I have observed. And one pro tip, and this former sort of VP of HR at Google, Laszlo Bach, wrote an article on LinkedIn that basically gives a winning formula for when you're crafting a CV or a resume. So if you really take each of your accomplishments and hold it up to the lens of, like, I accomplished X by doing Y with impact Z or Z, depending on if you have an American or a European audience here. But that can really help you frame those accomplishments in a way that does justice to someone's accomplishments.
Well, Jennifer, now I'd like to get you away from the computer and away from the office. Not that far away, though. Come back.
Back away.
Figuratively, I guess, because there's a whole other side to what you do that we all love here is the idea of traveling, and you have a great travel blog. I love I've never seen like a blog, a travel, or really any travel publication that has this kind of great variety. You're looking at festivals. You're going off the beaten track. You have one day in a place tips, biking, hiking. It's a great mix. It's really like a magazine, and it's great stuff about Ireland, but also around the world. So I think everybody in our global Irish nation will find their way over. Let me ask you this. You travel the world, you see big, impressive, unbelievable things. I find when I travel, sometimes it's these little weird offbeat moments, little things you stumble on walking around the corner that really stick with you more than the Eiffel Tower or the Colosseum. Any kind of little observations of things that just kind of stuck with you on a trip?
Yeah, it's hard to say because I think my motto and my husband's motto as well is basically every place is worth visiting at least once, whether it's around the corner or whether it's halfway around the world. And I don't know, just like the kindness of people. And there's like it's a lot of it tends to blur together, which is one of the reasons I've written the travel blog, because it helps to be able to sort of consult the record later or reminisce, and it's almost like reliving a trip when you're writing the blog posts. I'm trying to think if there's any things. Food memories, I would say, tend to linger the longest. Like one thing I remember from my travels, like we went to Sicily a few years ago, and in Palermo they have some of the best gelato you can get anywhere in the world. So we went to this one place, we ordered some, and instead of sort of handing us a little cup of delicious gelato, they took this beautiful brioche bun, slathered it full of like 3 or 4 scoops of delicious gelato. I'm like, it's a gelato sandwich. This is amazing. So it's those sorts of things that really,
Right.
I'm a bit of a foodie.
Well, what are some of your, international highlights? If you had your sort of top 10 list of things you've experienced and written about.
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit about that, like kind of reflecting on that prior to joining you. So I've definitely been to some exotic places. So places like Tasmania, Uganda, Patagonia. I think about it. I've stood on the equator. I've run my fingers through the waters of the Strait of Magellan. I have this fascination with the sort of age of exploration and explorers, and so like it was really cool to just be on the Strait of Magellan and think about that first round the world journey. So that's at the very tip of South America. I even saw a platypus in the wild in Tasmania, which just totally made my year. So there's so many memories. And at the same time, we've done extensive travel around Ireland as well. And in fact, some Irish people say to me sometimes it's like, wow, like you've seen more of Ireland than I have, and I've lived here my whole life. So it's every place is worth visiting, I think, is the bottom line.
And Martin and I were talking about it a little bit before we got on, how you can, the outsider can look at something with fresh eyes. My wife's from Italy. I travel there a lot, and I see things the natives don't see. I see things happening. I think things changing, and they're just not aware of it. So maybe in a way, you're a bit of a translator of experiences for your audience.
Yeah, I think because I think, you end up interpreting things through your own, through your own experience. I think, it's I haven't thought about it that way before, but like that resonates. That does resonate.
Well, I saw you did something on hurling, and you described hurling the way I would describe hurling to an American. Mm-hmm. And if you ask an Irish person, I don't think the description would come out anything like that. And I'm glad you took to hurling, because I know you're a hockey mm-hmm. fan. There is a hockey team in Belfast, and I know you're
Indeed.
a football fan. And Notre Dame, I know, is coming back in 2023 to play Navy. So put that in your calendar. Mm-hmm. But as you get into talking about Ireland, we've got an authentic Irishman in the room here, in Mr. Martin Nutty, and I think he could tee up some good conversation around your Irish travel experiences.
Just to kind of back up a little bit. What I think I appreciate about your blog is the actual name kind of gives me a bit of a clue about your approach towards travel. I think being on foot is important to you. And you mentioned the fact of actual meeting people. So we have kind of like, 2 types of travelers in a very generic way. The hermetically sealed type, the ones that are on a tour, they're kind of all shuttled around together and they get to interact very little. Or you seem to represent a different polarity, meaning I'm going to go out on foot. I have a particular set of things that I want to hit, but because I'm on foot, I'm going to encounter other things that I hadn't anticipated. Is that the approach? Is that how to understand it?
I think so. Well, just to give you a little bit of additional history of Sidewalk Safari. So I actually originally started the blog back in 2008 when we were living in San Francisco, and I thought we'd actually be settling in San Francisco. It's home. Like Ireland wasn't even on the radar at that point. And so the blog was originally called SF Urban Safari. And then in 2010, when the opportunity came to just pick up and move to Ireland, I thought, better rebrand because that doesn't make sense anymore. And really wanted to use the opportunity of our travel abroad to expand that focus and expand our horizons. But what really, like you said, it was all originally about like the cool things we'd see, like walking around San Francisco. So it was always at this like human scale and walking and not just letting things pass you by as you're riding by on a bus or in a car or whatnot. So yes. And, we typically don't do package tours. So I'm very fortunate. My husband is an expert travel planner. So we have this great division of labor. He plans all our trips, and then I basically take all the photos and write about it afterwards. So he's the planner. I'm the historian. And, so he dictates a lot of what we do or figures out the best things to do in different places. But we're not, I would say we're also not like overly scripted about what we do. So there's room for discovery. The other piece that I would just say, because you were talking about the folks that really immerse themselves in a place, I am still a little bit of an introvert, despite the fact that I'm appearing on podcasts and doing public speaking. So we possibly don't go as deep as some others might go, but again, we're not just in this hermetically sealed bubble of people on a tour bus or whatnot.
I think you're operating in a more interesting space from my perspective. And as John mentioned earlier, sometimes it's maybe destinations that people wouldn't really think about. And I noticed you wrote a post back in August, I believe, about Athlone as an actual destination. Now, I think if you ask many Irish people about Athlone, and for American listeners, Athlone is in the middle of Ireland. Right slam bang in the middle of Ireland. And it's generally a place that people pass through on the way to the West Coast, etc. But you listed out a whole bunch of things that would definitely be worth seeing. One that jumps to mind is, I think it's called Sean's Pub, which is now laying the claim to the oldest pub in Ireland. And I'm sure that's probably going to be disputed by many. Certainly as a Dubliner, we always like to talk about the Brazen Head as being the oldest pub in Ireland, and that's how I understood it. But Sean's Pub, the story behind that was fascinating, But tell me a little bit about your trip to Athlone.
Sure. No, happy to. So once again, every place is worth visiting at least once. And we lived in Ireland 10 years before we really got to Athlone, so to speak. But and one of the reasons we decided to go there this year was at the time, non-essential international travel was kind of off the cards. And in the summer, the West Coast and sort of the more traditional vacation destinations tend to be very busy and very crowded. So we thought we're going to go to the Midlands for our vacation and see what that's all about. And it turns out Athlone is a great home base for exploring like a lot of really interesting history, a lot of really interesting towns and places. So like you said, there's Sean's Pub. So you can go get a pint or a little nip of whiskey at they claim to be the oldest. There, like you said, there could be some debate about that, but 1,000 years of history there. You've got Clon MacNoise, which is one of the early Christian monastic sites that's just up the River Shannon. You can go boating on the River Shannon. So there's all kinds of fun things to do. We went to the Crolea Trackway, which is this ancient road that's like thousands of years old that was basically ended up like well preserved, like buried in a bog and well preserved for for millennia, only to be resurfaced. And there's now a museum, and you can tour the place. So there's all this just like fascinating history, and then towns like Birr, Tullamore. And there's a variety of places that you can see from Athlone. So it's a good home base for exploring.
I've been to Birr, the Leviathan, the telescope. Mm-hmm. Pretty cool.
No, oh yeah, exactly. It was, and like I've like Birr is actually also a cool place to stop if you're heading to points west. So we stopped at Birr Castle essentially on the way to Dingle. Or if you're going to the Ring of Kerry, like that's another good, it's a good stopping off point. And yeah, it was the largest telescope in the world for a period of time during the Victorian age. So in the 19th century. So fascinating history.
Yeah, I also noticed one of my favorite stomping grounds with my family also murdered a blog post, the town of Carlingford, which is north of Dublin in County Louth, or the Wee County as they call it. It's the smallest county in Ireland. And that's actually a favorite stomping area for my family. We regularly climb Carlingford Mountain, and the Irish name for the hill is escaping me, but it's also part of what they call the Tyne Trail, the Tyne Boy Cooling, the famous Irish epic. And that place is another one steeped in history. I don't know how many people actually have taken the time to go up there. Maybe Dubliners, it's not exotic enough, but it's a hell of a destination,
I agree with you. Couldn't agree more. And it's one of those destinations that for years we intended to go to, and we only just got to it this year, actually. So we did a long weekend in Carlingford, just as a change of scenery from Dublin. And the great thing that you can actually rent a Tesla in Dublin now. Like, so there's this company called UFO Drive, and you can hire a car for a day or a weekend. And like we hired a Tesla, we drove up to Carlingford, and there's a lot of really cool history. There's a castle, of course, and the town is just full of beautiful colors, just a very, very colorful town, very small. The thing I didn't know before we went up there, so apparently it's a place where people go for like hen and stag parties or bachelorette parties, depending on who's listening. So that was interesting. So there's this history, and then also it's kind of a party place. So depending on what you're looking for, I think it has something for everyone.
Yeah, and I missed out on the parties,
Yeah. I've been around some of those parties in Dublin, and pretty crazy stuff.
I prefer, it's not really my thing. I prefer to avoid it if I can. But I was like, we're going to sort of Stag Central, but it was fine at the time. This was back in June of this year. So it's also just you can take a ferry into Northern Ireland and take a nice drive as well. So there's some interesting places to go from
Carlingford Bay has to be one of the most beautiful spots in Ireland. Of course, you got the view of the Mourne Mountains there as well, and that's part of that Cooley Peninsula thing, which is like steeped in kind of mythology/history. Can't recommend it strongly enough. But John, you had a question you wanted to.
No, I was just thinking about you're really getting into it. You're talking about beautiful vistas and great scenes. Part of what you're doing, Jennifer, on your blog is not just writing; it's photography. Any kind of great moments? Your Kodak moments, as we would say, in Rochester, New York, where you spent some time. Any images that
my
released?
Gosh. Well, so I think like I do love my door photography. So that's what my Instagram is all full of. But I remember we were in Kilkee Castle. We did a weekend away about almost a year ago to the day. And then we went to this one little home and gardens. I'm trying to remember the name of it now. Not too far away from the castle, but we're walking around the property, and I look over and I see like this donkey standing at a gate looking at us, like maybe hoping we had a little carrot or something. But I looked more carefully, and the donkey was basically smiling at me. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is like this is my photo moment. And so I got the picture of the smiling donkey near Kilkee Castle. I'm like, yes.
Well, in a way, Jennifer, that's like, maybe that's the answer to the question I asked you about those small moments that really stick out to you. It's, I'll just tell quickly a small moment. I was in Italy recently, and you go to. I was there for the All Souls Day, and you go to the cemetery on that day. And on the way in, there's an old, decrepit, toothless guy with a shopping cart selling chestnuts. Cooked roasted chestnuts. So I said on the way out, I definitely want to get some chestnuts. So I go on the way out, and we go up to him and ask for chestnuts. He said, "Do you have a reservation?"
Oh my goodness.
So it's like, I'm sorry, which app am I supposed to use? Or, I just, to me, that was like the best thing I heard on the whole trip was the old toothless chestnut vendor asking me if I had reservations for the chestnut. That was great. Anyway,
I love that.
let's move into the the American in Ireland. Talk about that aspect of your life, and maybe I'll do it this way: just kind of how Irish are you? How American are you? I noticed you use Z now instead of Z, so you've made that transition. And in an email, when we were talking about getting set up for this call, you said about your own setup with your mic and all that. You said, "We should be grand," which is not an American expression. So how American are you? How Irish are you?
No, that's a good question. And I think it flexes depending on the circumstances. So I know, like, I'll try and use Irish slang and jargon when I'm in Ireland, or whenever I'm talking to Irish people or Europeans, and I'll use American isms when I'm in the U.S. And I try, occasionally I get it wrong. Like, so one, for example, one thing I noticed when I first moved here. So yeah, like instead of saying like "excuse me," people in Ireland will say "sorry." I'm sorry, sorry, and that doesn't mean like "I am sorry." It basically means "excuse me, get out of my way." So and so occasionally, like now, like I've taken to saying sorry to people to mean "excuse me." And when I'm in the U.S., some people will look at me and say, "Oh, you're okay. That's okay." And I'm like, "I wasn't saying that. I was basically telling you to get out of my way." So it's a lot of it's like the little differences, and like the longer you live here, the more nuances you notice, I would say. Yeah, I mean, I'll never be a proper Dub since I wasn't born in Dublin, but some of my colleagues joke I'm more Irish than the Irish themselves, since I use a lot of, like I said, what's the crack, and I'll say "your man, your one." Like, there's a lot of things I say, and a lot of people who were born here, they'll laugh at me because I say Irish things with like a Yank accent. Basically, is how they describe it. It's interesting too, because like I think. I'll always in Ireland. I'll always be an American. Like it's slightly frustrating sometimes because you walk into a shop, and as soon as you talk to someone, they say, "Oh, how long are you visiting for? Are you having a good trip?" And so you get this assumption that you're a tourist. And then I have to realize this is for me, it's the 10th person saying this to me in a day, or maybe not in a day. That's exaggerating a little bit, but people say that to me all the time, but it's the first time this person's engaging with me. So just having that, patience, I suppose, with people's assumptions.
We talk a lot about in the podcast about the liminal experience. In other words, you have one foot still in America by virtue of your origin, and now you have a well-established foot in Ireland. And you see, at least in my experience, I'm living in America for 38 years, but I still see the country, I believe, in a very different way because of that, and constantly making these comparisons. So when I was in Ireland recently, I was comparing the Dublin of 1983 to the contemporary Dublin. And I do believe people that have those kind of experiences are extraordinarily valuable, because they ask the questions that other people would never ask. But I also recognize the fact that that I certainly feel like a bit like an outsider, and will always, to some degree, be treated like an outsider. But I wouldn't have it any other way, personally. But I'm kind of curious, you're in Ireland over 10 years now. How does America look now, or how do you view America now after 10 years living in Ireland? and being colored by that experience. And you can take any aspect of American culture you want to. What do you see differently now than you would have before you traveled?
Now that's an interesting one. And yeah, you're right. It's a unique experience, sort of living somewhere else, like living outside your home country, or your country of origin. And I wouldn't trade that experience for anything in the world. Like it's been, so educational and so mind broadening to live in a new place. But how do I see the U.S. differently now? I definitely think I would experience reverse culture shock if I move back, because I've gotten used to the way things are in Ireland. And I fortunately, because of my job, when we're not living in a pandemic, I would have the opportunity to travel back to the US, a number of times every year. So get my dose of the things that I like about America and the things that I enjoy, about living or experiencing the US. In terms of how I view it differently, so it's like thinking about like the capitalist culture or the consumerist culture that there is in the US. Just that strikes me more now. I remember when we first moved to Ireland, it took some getting used to that the shops aren't open like super late hours, or more limited hours on Sundays and whatnot. Or you go into a grocery store and there's not aisle after aisle of cereal and choice and all these kind of things. I mean, I find now that if I go into a supermarket in the US, it's just I'm overwhelmed by choice. Which was, I was, would sort of lament the lack of choice when I first moved here. And now I kind of appreciate that more. It's not even limited. It's just, it's less overwhelming, I suppose. There's less of that consumerist culture.
Here. There's a scene in a Robin Williams movie, which is called Moscow on the Hudson. He's a musician who defects to the U.S. And there's a scene where he goes into a supermarket and he's in the coffee aisle and he just starts looking at all the varieties of coffee and he has a panic attack. It's just way too much choice for him. But you kind of bring up something there about things that work in one country, things that don't work in another country. I always see that, like, why don't we have that in our country? Or the country I'm in, why did they do it that way when they could do it this way? So are there things that, American things that you wish you saw in Ireland? And are there American things you wish you didn't see in Ireland?
That's a good question. I think the things that I miss most about living in the U.S., or the things that I can't find here as easily, they do tend to be food related. I really up until more recently, I really missed Mexican food and margaritas. That's my go-to when I travel to California for work. I have my go-to place in the Bay Area, and fortunately now, I think Ireland gets kind of a bad reputation as having the food isn't great and there's not a lot of restaurants. But the reality is the food scene here is actually very good. There's a lot of great restaurants. There's a lovely taco place now that we've discovered, run by people from Mexico, which it's as good as anything I would get in the Bay Area. So there's fewer things that I'm missing and pining away for from the U.S. at any point in time. One thing I'm actually glad they don't do here, it's interesting, the sort of in your face advertisements that you get in the US, if you're watching TV, it's this drug and that drug and list of side effects and oh my goodness, how can people listen to this all the time? Just some of the overt advertising and just it tends to be a lot more, overwhelming and in your face than it is here.
I think we're getting to that point in time where we introduce our good friend Seamus Plug.
There we go.
So we're curious to know, Jennifer, what your Seamus Plug is.
Oh, my shameless plug. I know I'm trying to think. I think, hey, just if I'd love to have you take a look at my blog. So sidewalksafari.com. that's always appreciated. Or like I say, give my Instagram a view if you're interested in seeing what all the fuss is about the beautiful Georgian doors. For the techies in the audience, I would say if the concept of site reliability engineering appealed to you, so SRE, definitely check out sre.google to learn more. The Google SRE website also has the full text of our original SRE book that we published back in 2016. So it's a great resource to learn more about this, evolving and growing area of tech. Maybe that was 3 shameless plugs. Sorry, guys.
That was a good one. Some of them are half the show.
Okay. We'll try not to do that.
I just want to give you my own shameless plug here. Sidewalk Safari. We talked a lot about Irish travel, but if you're going anywhere in the world, stop by Sidewalk Safari. Jennifer may have written about it and may be offering you some great tips on how to navigate your way through new travel adventures.
Yeah, what is it, Jennifer? 60 countries and counting, or where are we at right now?
I've lost count, but I think it's over. It's 60-ish countries, depending on how you count. And I think the other thing that makes Sidewalk Safari unique, or our travels unique, is a lot of times we'll combine a business trip with something fun. So like there's a lot about how do you make the most of traveling for work? How do you make the most of limited vacation time while you're sort of holding down a full-time job? And lately, I would say the new hotness is the workcation. So, basically like working from somewhere else for a period of time. So recently spent a week in Saratoga Springs, New York, and Poughkeepsie, so in the Hudson River Valley. And we've done that in Ireland too, in Waterville, staying in the old telegraph building where the transatlantic cable was
strung across the Atlantic.
Yeah, came ashore. Yeah, strung across to Canada, however you want to describe it. It's fascinating history there as well. So give a workcation a try.
Just jump in there, but I saw the Saratoga Springs. I was going to mention that earlier. I spent 17 summers of my life in Saratoga Springs. I used to work in the horse racing business. I worked for the Saratoga Race Course, and a fantastic place. And no one would go wrong by visiting Saratoga Springs any time of the year, but particularly during the racing season.
And during the autumn, like the beautiful fall foliage. And for those that are into doors as much as I am, the Saratoga Springs has a fantastic door game, if you will, like a beautiful, beautiful doors on the historic homes.
I'm thinking we got some kind of new board game that's going to come out of this. The door game.
I created a door game.
I thought I saw that. Yeah.
I there's a bingo card and a scavenger hunt on Sidewalk Safari for finding doors. So yes,
we'll direct the listeners to that page in particular.
So Jennifer, I'd just like to thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to sit down and tell us a little bit about your career and your technical life, but also your travels and your perspective. As a American living in Ireland, and now as an Irish person looking back at America. I think it's really enlightening, very enjoyable. I hope we get to have a pint in your favorite haunt. I'm not sure, we didn't cover that, your favorite pub in Dublin. Or do you have a particular one? But the next time I'm in Dublin, I'm going to ping you, and hopefully we get to meet up.
Yeah, no, I would love to grab a pint with yourself, Martin, and John, if you make it over as well. Like it's great. We'll buy you around for sure. And I would say Beggar's Bush is a great pub in Ballsbridge, not too far from where I live. Good locals pub.
Well, we'll look forward to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
The final travel tip from Jennifer. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Well, John, that was an interesting conversation, and it feels like we covered 2 very distinct domains. Tech, specifically site reliability engineering, and now we know what SRE stands for, and travel. So being the tech nerd out of the pair of us, I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about Jennifer's tech experience. And one of the things that really struck me was Jennifer referred to her high school education in Buffalo. And she remarked that she went to an all-girls high school, and she was interested in pursuing chemistry. And she felt that was important because it allowed her to nerd out a little bit without looking uncool in front of teenage boys, etc. And It's not the first time I've heard that, but it's just interesting to call it out.
What struck me was the travel part of it. I had a brief career as a travel writer, so my overwhelming emotion here is complete envy and jealousness of her great track record. She's had Sidewalk Safari going for, I think, about a dozen years, which is quite a record for a blogger of any kind. And I really recommend people, wherever they're going. It seems like Jennifer's been there and she's got great tips, what to do in one day in a town you had never thought of going to, 15 things to do on a nearby weekend. And it was cool to hear how she's focused in those near to Dublin experiences, as folks in Ireland and everywhere aren't traveling as much as they used to, and they're rediscovering the great attractions in their backyard.
And just before we go, John, we do share links for all of our guests. And I wanted to point people at our website, which is irishstewpodcast.com. And if you go visit that, you'll find that each guest that we have on the show has their own episode page. And on that episode page, we have show notes which detail links to various things that our guests mentioned in the course of the conversation. Lots of detail there, and I recommend you pay it a visit. If you want to engage, for example, with Sidewalk Safari, you'll find a link to that.
And that's where you'll also find the links to the Seamus plug.
Absolutely. Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.